Welcome to the Times of Israel's daily briefing. Today is Tuesday, January 27th. I'm Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our military correspondent, Emanuel Fabian. Manny, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi, Amanda.
Today is the first day in 844 days that we are not marking the day of the war, following the return of the final hostage, Ran Gvili, from Gaza yesterday. For the first time since 2014, there is no Israeli hostage held in Gaza. So today we're going to go into the Operation Courageous Heart that did recover the body of Ran Gvili yesterday. All of this and more when we're back.
3 million Israelis are dealing with trauma since October 7th. To help Israelis heal, Hadassah is there, with the largest rehabilitation center in Jerusalem, world-renowned medical centers, and youth villages. It's said, saving a life saves the world. Imagine helping millions. This is Hadassah, a life-changing force in Israel and the world.
And we're back. I'm Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our military correspondent, Emanuel Fabian. Impromptu gatherings took place all over Israel last night as Israelis celebrated the return of Ran Gvili. We took to social media posting pictures and reels of taking off all the hostage banners, the flags, the yellow pins from ourselves as we celebrated the return of Ran Gvili home. For more than 50 days, he was the final hostage kept in Gaza following the ceasefire in October. And last night, in the presence of police officers and soldiers, his father, Itzik, said over the casket of his son, "You dummy, you had every chance to stay at home, but you said, 'Dad, what did you tell me? I won't leave my friends to fight alone.'" His mother, Talik Gvili, wrote, "He was the first to go out, the last to come back, our hero. Our pride is much, much stronger than our pain," she said. "The people of Israel live and are strong." Manny, yesterday we spoke about Ran Gvili, but today let's remind our listeners who he was and what he did for our country.
So Ran Gvili was a police officer. He set out from his home in southern Israel, Meitar, it's near Beersheba, on the morning of October 7th upon Hamas launching its attack. And he reached Kibbutz Alubim, where he and other forces battled quite a large number of Hamas terrorists and actually prevented them from entering the community. During this exchange of fire, he was injured and died of his injuries, and then his body was abducted to Gaza. And it's also really important to say that he set out despite him having an injury at the time. He was suffering from a shoulder injury. And he didn't need to be, in service. He was on leave, but he set out anyway. And as far as the military understands, is that he was abducted by the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, not Hamas. But later on, as we'll discuss, his body may have been moved from multiple locations and via different terror groups as well, with Hamas also having some knowledge of where he was.
So his family didn't receive any kind of really firm proof of his death after he was abducted. In fact, I think it was only maybe a year later that there was some kind of indication that he was indeed dead. And the family has said throughout their long struggle that they will only fully accept his death when his body returns home. Manny, what do you know about the path to find any kind of information about Gvili over this long struggle?
So really, like you mentioned, when he was abducted, there wasn't really actual proof that he was killed during the abduction. We sort of understood that he was injured and shot during this exchange of fire just outside Alumim. And it really took about a year for there to be information that confirmed that he was killed during that exchange. The exact information I'm not certain, but it's possible that it was both, information from the ground, on October 7th, footage, testimonies, etc., or intelligence recovered in Gaza from the questioning of terror operatives or other intelligence that was received. But there was a point where Israel declared his death sort of official. But one of the big questions was where is Gvili's body, and this was something that had been sort of very difficult for the Israeli security system for a long time. They really didn't know exactly where he was. There were several, I would say, intelligence leads on where the body could have been or maybe possibly was during the past 2 years plus of the war. And his body may have been moved from multiple locations, as the Shin Bet has sort of revealed. It recently questioned a Palestinian Islamic Jihad operative who was captured in Gaza, and he provided information ultimately on where the body was actually held, which was buried in the cemetery in eastern Gaza City. But he also detailed that the body had been moved around in other places. So there were 4 main locations where Israel thought his body was actually buried or being held. One was at Shifa Hospital in Gaza City. There was another cemetery in Gaza City on the Hamas side of the Yellow Line. There was a tunnel on the Israeli side of the Yellow Line, and this last cemetery where his body was ultimately recovered. It is entirely possible that the body was held at Shifa at one point and then moved to the tunnel and then moved to that graveyard and moved to the other graveyard. It could be it was only between some of them, but it's not fully clear when exactly the body was moved to where it was ultimately found. But the intelligence on the body being held at that specific graveyard was known to the military for some time. It's only recently that the information was sort of, I would say, made more clear, both because of this Islamic Jihad operative who was captured last month, who ultimately provided the information or confirmed it, and also Israel sent to Hamas via the mediators a request to confirm the details about this cemetery in eastern Gaza City, and Hamas confirmed that information to Israel, and that is the reason why we saw this operation take place from over the weekend and obviously being completed yesterday.
Before we go on, I think it's important to slightly untangle the Palestinian Islamic Jihad and just give a little insight into what this organization is as opposed to Hamas and how they fit together, indeed.
So Islamic Jihad is allied with Hamas. They're the second largest terror group in Gaza. They also have thousands of operatives. Still, even currently, they still have thousands of operatives. And they worked, of course, alongside Hamas during the October 7th onslaught. They weren't in the first wave, which was Hamas's elite Nukhba force that sort of launched the raid, but they did join in the second and third waves of the terror onslaught. And they were, of course, involved in abducting many of the hostages and, of course, carrying out the massacres in southern Israel. But the interesting thing is that because they are allied with Hamas, all of the hostage negotiations and the releases and everything, Hamas normally takes control of that sort of thing. So when we saw hostages who were held by Islamic Jihad being released, they were released in together with Hamas. So Hamas would take control of the release ceremony and all of that, those arrangements of handing them over to the Red Cross and everything. So in this case, Hamas was also somewhat involved. They had the knowledge of where Gvili was buried. They weren't, I would say, really providing that information willingly. It took time for Israel to, arrest someone in Gaza and question them and then confirm it with Hamas, sort of a bit of a round way of doing things. But Hamas was, I would say, very much in charge of all of the hostages, even the ones abducted by Islamic Jihad and other terror groups as well. Islamic Jihad's not the only one. There were other groups, smaller groups like the Mujahideen brigades who abducted the Bibas family, for example, who were also involved in the abductions on October 7th.
Right, and indeed, Palestinian Islamic Jihad crowed that they had given this information to the IDF months prior, at least weeks prior, but it wasn't until the capture, as you said, of the operative and the ability to confirm the information that this Operation Courageous Heart was carried out. So let's drill into the operation. It was massive by any kind of a sense. And in terms of the team, the makeup of the team, we discussed this briefly yesterday, but now we know finer details. What was the makeup of this team in this cemetery?
So the forces securing this operation was the Alexandria Brigade. It's a reservist brigade. They were deployed to the cemetery and also slightly beyond it, so even on the Hamas side of the yellow line, which is another reason why this operation didn't go out immediately, because to be able to operate over the ceasefire line, Israel needed to actually sort of coordinate that with the US as well to make sure that this can actually go ahead, because of course, it being sensitive during the ceasefire to operate over the ceasefire line. So really, a very, very large number of troops were there to secure the operation. We had these engineering vehicles that were operating there, heavy machinery to help dig up these graves. And we're also talking about numerous forensic experts, including 20 dentists who are operating there. The forensic experts are from both from the police and the health ministry and the Abu Kabir Forensic Institute, not soldiers, but essentially Israeli forensic experts who were drafted to this cause. And basically over the weekend, the army began exhuming hundreds of bodies at the cemetery. I don't have a specific number of how many bodies they actually dug up, but by Monday, in sort of the early afternoon hours, right before they found Gvili's body, they had already tested 250 of these bodies for a potential match. So we're talking about these forensic experts going grave, looking at the body, first of all, things like clothing, and then checking the dental patterns, the dental structure, and basically with one of the bodies, they were able to confirm, these dentists, that the dental structure matched Gvili's, the information that they already had on file. They also took fingerprints that they were able to take from the body on the ground, they're talking about, before they even got to a lab or anything, and tested all there. And they were doing this for every single body, by the way. So it took, I mean, even considering they went through 250 bodies in about a day and a half is very impressive, I would say. But they were able to confirm on the ground that it was indeed Gvili's body. We also heard that his clothing, he was still in his police uniform. That's what the police have said as well. So they were able to also use that as an identifier. And then once they had essentially confirmed it was his, then the army notified his family, and they began the process of bringing the body out of Gaza back to Israel. It has since been taken to Abu Kabir, the Forensic Institute in Tel Aviv, for a more full forensic analysis. It's a normal process that is done. They don't need to confirm his identity, but things like the cause of death and everything, they will be going through that. And then a funeral is planned for Wednesday in his hometown.
Let's go to a short break.
What if prayer doesn't work? This question strikes us as a distinctly modern one, an outgrowth of the slow disenchantment of the world. But in truth, the question is an old one, and one given space to breathe here.
Welcome to Thoughts and Prayers. I'm your host, Jessica Fisher. Join me on a deep exploration of the relationship between religion and modernity through personal stories, classical texts, and conversations with leading rabbis, scholars, and educators.
You're almost not supposed to be doing this interview.
Our prayers accumulate on God's doorstep, piled outside like an unimaginably tall stack of letters. We cannot give up on the relationship because God doesn't come to the door as quickly as we may like. So let's keep knocking. Perhaps the gates of compassion will be opened.
Join us every week on Thoughts and Prayers, wherever you get your podcasts.
And we're back. I'm Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our military correspondent, Emanuel Fabian. The operation to retrieve Ran Gvili's remains is just one of several amazingly heroic stories that we've heard over the course of this 2.5-year war. And you mentioned, of course, the imperative to get secure intel in order to find the remains. And one story that, of course, comes to mind more than any other is that of Ran Shaul. So before we return to Ran Gvili's story, let's remind our listeners of how Ran Shaul came back home.
So Ran Shaul was, first of all, just as a bit of background, he was killed during the 2014 Gaza war and abducted to Gaza, the same war in which Lieutenant Hadar Goldin was killed in a different incident, of course, not the same event. But his body was held in Gaza for over a decade. A year ago, the army announced that it had recovered his remains. They didn't really give many details about the operation. And then recently, a year later, we're now hearing new details of what exactly went down to get his body out of Gaza. According to the IDF, the troops of the elite Sayeret Matkal unit captured a Palestinian in Gaza City, and he was interrogated, and he pointed to the information on where Shaul's body was being held. And then a day later, the body was retrieved. And according to this other report by Ynet, the body was actually retrieved by a Palestinian informant from the location that the arrested suspect pointed to. And according to the report, this Palestinian informant basically was sent to this house to go retrieve the body, and brought it with him and carried it on his shoulder, wrapped in a rug, for around 1.5 kilometers or around a mile, all the way to the IDF troops waiting for him, because the army couldn't really go into that site because it's in a sort of a civilian area in Gaza, and that would have been that would have been much more dangerous to do. So they had, according to this report, this informant come and bring this body all the way to the troops, and then it was, of course, brought out of Gaza. The army said that it had basically carried out the operation in a way that didn't endanger any of the living hostages who were held in Gaza City at the time, because, of course, if troops were to have entered Gaza City to that specific area to retrieve the body, then there, of course, is a chance that Hamas would have killed the living hostages that it was holding also in the area. So really quite an incredible story.
Let's return to Ran Gvili, and it cannot be underestimated the emotional impact that his return has on the Israeli people. And we saw, of course, even out on the field, soldiers spontaneously breaking out into song, singing Ani Ma'amin, a Jewish prayer that calls for the coming of the Messiah, and is a real creed of faith in hope. And our national anthem was also sung in the presence of the chief of staff. So, Manny, paint the scene a little bit for us here.
So it was really a very emotional moment for the soldiers on the ground. Of course, this is it's the final hostage that was still in Gaza. They've been searching for Gvili's body for a long time. All these intelligence operations, and over a day and a half or so, these troops are working in the cemetery, digging up grave by grave, and then all of a sudden there's sort of this announcement that they found it. They found the body. So we saw these videos of these reservists from the Alexandroni Brigade singing Ani Ma'amin, like you said. And then that's literally as they found and identified that the body belonged to Gvili. And then around an hour later, IDF Chief of Staff Eyal Zamir and the Chief of the Southern Command, and the officers all headed to the site. They brought the body out, wrapped it in an Israeli flag, and held a sort of a brief ceremony in his memory. And there, you could see in the footage all the officers and soldiers saluting and singing Hatikva, Israel's national anthem. And from there, the body was then brought out of Gaza, but there was another short ceremony also held at the IDF's Nahal Oz base. That was sort of held by the police because, of course, Gvili was a police officer. So the police commissioner and Gvili's father and Zamir and all these other officers all attended the ceremony at the Nahal Oz base, where there were some eulogies that were said. And only from there his body was brought out. But it was quite a long process. Obviously, there isn't really a major rush in getting it out now because the funeral's only really planned for Wednesday. But they did take time, and the army and the police all showed their respect to Gvili, who is now, his body is back in Israel and his family can bury him. and not have this sort of worry anymore that his body will never be found. Because before, I would say a few months ago, when we started seeing the hostages being released from Gaza, all the living ones, and when Hamas released all the dead, there was a fear in Israel, and especially among the families, that there were a number of hostages, between 5 and 10 or so, that Israel didn't really have enough information on where they were located. And there was a real fear that they would never be found. And we heard this from various officials and also from the family members. But knowing that now that, all of them are out, I think that's quite a big relief for all of these families.
Right. And not only is the Times of Israel stopping its count of the days of war, but at 5:30 in Hostages Square, the clock there will also stop in a short ceremony that we should cover in our live blog. Now, Manny, as you mentioned, the funeral for Gvili is on Wednesday, and I understand that the IDF is going to be returning the exhumed bodies to the graves in the Gazan cemetery. In addition, there is always a trade for any living or dead hostage that comes out. Israel also responds in kind, shall we say, and returns, I believe it is 15 for every deceased hostage, 15 living or dead Palestinian security prisoners. Do you know, Manny?
We're talking about 15 dead normally. That's what it was in previous cases. Although there's two kind of, if say one is Hamas technically didn't return Gvili's body, Israel did. But I still think that Israel will return the 15. That's what the deal sort of stipulates, that Israel needs to return, so it probably will. And also we may see Israel return more bodies because it is the final one. It depends on whatever the actual details of the agreement say. But we will probably see Israel return via the Red Cross bodies of Palestinians back to Gaza. Living, there was a report, I think, that some detainees were also returned to Gaza. I'm not certain if that's related to the return of Gvili or not, or just Palestinians who are sent back to the Strip. That happens all the time, not in relation to any deal. And regarding the graveyard itself, the Muslim cemetery in Gaza City, the army has already begun returning all of these exhumed bodies, hundreds of them, back to their graves, and also cleaning up the cemetery. The army says that it's out of respect for the dead, it doesn't want to leave it a complete mess. It is still a cemetery, so they are returning all of the bodies and cleaning up.
So in many ways, this closes the first phase of the ceasefire, and phase 2 is meant to include the demilitarization of Hamas. Obviously, we don't know what's going to happen. We cannot predict the future, but the U.S. is incredibly optimistic, especially after seeing the return of the body of Ran Gvili, and says that this is what can happen when countries such as Turkey, Qatar, and Hamas and the Palestinian Authority all work together. So, Manny, we're hearing, of course, reports that another portion of the phase 2 is going to be launched even by the end of this week, and that is the opening of the Rafah crossing. We discussed this yesterday. Do you have any updates in terms of the timing on this?
I don't think we know an exact timing yet, but it does look like it'll happen very soon. Everything that Israel asked for has sort of been fulfilled. It said that it'd only open Rafah for pedestrians once the return of all the hostages, and we're at that stage already. And I do think it will open in the coming days, and we've also been hearing this from the Palestinian side as well, that they expect it to open in the coming days. So I think we will see that. The demilitarization and the rebuilding and all of that, I think that's maybe a slightly further off, if at all. But that's, of course, up to the Americans and all the other mediators involved in this effort. I just want to add one thing. An interesting thing that the IDF chief said, Eyal Zamiri, said that with the return of Gvili's body, said that the military has completed one of its principal missions in the Gaza Strip. And they have completed the effort of returning all the hostages, not just the ones from October 7th, but those who were also held in 2014, or since 2014. So for the first time in 12 years, there are no hostages in Gaza. And the IDF chief said, we have completed a war objective. One of the main goals, which is returning the hostages, they've completed it. Of course, the campaign against Hamas is not over. They still need to demilitarize Gaza and remove Hamas from power. And that's obviously the second war objective that Israel has said it wants to achieve. But that is something that can't just be done alone by the military. Of course, it's a much more complicated and diplomatic effort.
And so today we all, in many ways, echo the sentiments of Ran Gvili, Ran's sister, who said, "There's a sense of relief and we feel free." Manny, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Times of Israel's Daily Briefing. Please check out another installment tomorrow. This episode was produced by the Podwaves and Ari Schlacht. If you have any questions or comments about this or any other episode, please drop us an email to podcast@timesofisrael.com. Until tomorrow, shalom.